Okay, now that we have the basics of the camera movement covered, let's jump over to our range file that has all of our props in it. This is our Port Coquitlam District Hunting and Fishing Club range layout. This is our range 1, range 2, range 3, range 4, range 5, range 6, and our list of props that are, for lack of a better term, approved by IPSC. These ranges are to scale, so whatever we design on this layout, you can actually use the dimensions from this and lay it out in real world, which is why we really recommend doing your stages in here. You can do a lot of pre-screening of the stages on here, and when you get to actually building it, a lot of that guesswork, if you will, is already taken care of. So if we zoom over, remember we're using the wheel mouse in. One thing to note, you notice right now how it seems to be slowing down as I'm wheeling the mouse in. Depending on where your mouse is hovering over top of, it will scale differently. So right now this is scaling, it's using infinite space here, whereas if I just do nothing more than just hover over the gray area here, it is zooming to that surface. So keep that in mind if you're trying to zoom into something and you're wondering why it's not going in. Just moving it close to an object is usually helpful. Okay, so what we have here is our tool shed. These objects here, I've created this walkway, these walls, the door, the fault lines, but all these other items, including all these targets and whatnot, have actually been downloaded. If we zip back over to sketchup.com, and if we just click on products and scroll down to our 3D warehouse under resources, you can find virtually anything that you want, both shooting related and not. So if we just type in IPSC, for instance, you'll see we get a number of props. And I do recall that there was, here you go. So somebody's created a library of props. I'd have to go through this because there are a number of things in here. Even though that this is listed as IPSC stuff, you'll find that a lot of these things are either IDPA or just simply not approved for use in IPSC. So that's, if we go back over to our list here, so far, at least for the props that we have at our range, this has sufficed for virtually all of our stages. Now that we've taken a look at the props, we're going to move this double barrel over to our range 6. There are some move features that can cause a lot of confusion. By taking a look at this with just this double barrel, it'll hopefully clarify a lot of those issues. So when we click an item, and this is popper as a good example, if I left click on the popper itself, it creates what they call a bounding box around the object. If I click inside of the box but not on the object itself, it doesn't recognize that I want to select the popper, and it selects the thing that is behind, which in this case happens to be the ground. So if you want to select an item, make sure that you select the actual item, like click on the item, not like this is not the item, it sees through that. And so just keep that in mind when you're selecting things. So if we want to select the barrel, we're going to press the space bar, which is the hotkey for the select tool. We're going to left click on the barrel, anywhere on the barrel is fine, and then we're going to press the M key for move, which is shown over here. If we hover over top of the barrel itself, we see that these red, first of all, it snaps to portions of the barrel itself, and we also have these red crosses on each one of the faces. If I hover over top of the top, you see like those 4 crosses show up on the top of the object as well. These are an integrated rotation tool. Now the nice thing about these versus the rotation tool, which we'll cover in a second, is this automatically centers to the object itself. If I just come over here to the rotate button, the hotkey is Q, I can select anywhere on the barrel. So if I go to rotate something, it's not necessarily going to rotate, first of all, it won't rotate perpendicular to one of the axes, but it's not necessarily centered either. So if I rotate here, for instance, it's going to rotate on some goofy angle. If you do happen to click something, you can hit the escape key and it will basically cancel what you're doing. If you've left clicked and you happen to rotate and you left click again, you can hit the Control Z key to undo that. So if we go back to pressing the M key for move, as long as we select something inside the bounding box, and that includes not touching the barrel itself, just staying away from the rotation, the built-in rotation points, we can move this object around. Now there is issues that can come up if we don't spend a little bit of time on this. As we move, you'll notice that next to my cursor there's that red line that's being projected. That tells me that I'm moving this in the x-axis or the red axis. If I move straight back, actually sorry, this is moving straight up. It's got the blue, which we knew earlier was the z-axis or the up and down. And if I move the cursor backwards, it is green, which is our y-axis. Now you just have to point it in the right direction and hope that it kind of goes where you want. If you press the cursor keys, you can lock this into directions. So if you've got a lot of geometry and objects around and you're trying to work around it and it's just causing you confusion, there's two things you can do. You can either use the cursor keys. So for instance, if I press the left arrow, it locks this in the y-axis or the green axis. So no matter where I go, it'll stay stuck in that direction. If I left click again, it unlocks that direction. If I press the up arrow, it goes to the z-axis, and it's skipping like this because of other interference issues that we'll cover in a second. If I use the up arrow again, it'll unlock that axis. If I use the right button, it locks itself in the x-axis. There's a down button as well, which does lock, but we'll cover that in a little bit when we actually get to that point there. So as long as I stay on either the x or the y-axis, this will stay stuck to the floor. And that's one of our biggest problems that we have here, is a lot of times when we go to move stuff around, we end up going either into the ground or we end up in space because of where the camera is pointed. So as long as you stay on those axes, you shouldn't have any problems with keeping this on the ground. So try to get in the habit, if you need to move something around, while it might be easier if I needed to move this barrel from here to here, it might seem easy to move this over to here, but you'll most likely end up in the ground or up in space. So you're better off, if you can, to move it in one direction first, left click to deselect or to finish your movement, left click again and move it in the opposite axis to stay on the ground here. So we'll demonstrate that by moving this over to our range 6 here. So if we want to move that double barrel to this range, if we just hover over the object, we can pick a spot anywhere we want. So I've left clicked and released the mouse buttons. Right now I'm not pressing anything. If I move my mouse over to the left here, making sure that I see that red axis and get it roughly centered to the stage here, I can left click to finish my move, and then I can left click again and make sure I'm on the green axis and bring it over to the stage, left click again to complete that. So now I've got a barrel that if I hover over right along the edge. As you can just see, we're snapped to the ground here. So that's what I want to do. So moving is relatively easy. The issue comes in if we have two of these barrels. If we want to make a copy of this object, we can left click to move it. If we press the control key, it'll create a duplicate of that object. If we press the control key a second time, it reverts back to not being a duplicate. It just becomes a move. So if we create a second barrel here, and we left click to finish our move. So now we have two barrels. They're independent of each other, so I can still move this barrel around. It's the same as hitting copy and paste. The issue comes down to if I wanted to move this barrel, say, in front of this barrel, or across the barrel, if I spacebar to activate the selection tool, and left click to activate this barrel, press the M key to move. If I move my barrel across this object, you see when it gets close to the barrel, it starts to get all jumpy because it's trying to move the actual cursor on the surface of this barrel. And it's even more exaggerated if I move this back a little bit. And now I move this. It doesn't know what to do. It becomes very skittish. When we start doing walls and things, that becomes very evident. There's two ways to do this. You can either move the object away from the barrel and move it in this fashion, or if you move your camera angle so that when we move our object, the cursor doesn't cross over objects. So maybe we'll come from the back here and we move our object this way. We don't have that problem with the cursor tries to jump on top of another object. Like I say, we start putting walls in here, that will become very evident. If we want to rotate an object, we can either use the quick points here, or we can press the Q button. It creates a freeform rotation tool. On a rounded object like this, I highly suggest that you use the move tool and just pick one of these quick rotation points. So in order to rotate an object, if you hover over the item and you press the left mouse button once, it enters rotation mode. So now if I rotate the object outside of the protractor, I'll get a nice smooth rotation. I can put this in whatever angle I want, spin it 360 degrees. Let's escape out of here and let's zoom back over and grab a wall. So spacebar to click the select button, left click on an object. Now I can left click on this because these are actually made of mesh, which is a solid face with a see-through texture on it. So I'm going to left click this wall and I'm going to use my pan and orbit tools to get a better view. I'm going to press the M key to move. I'm going to left click on the wall, move it in the red axis, left click to finish my move, left click again to move it on the green axis, and left click again to finish my move. So when you're doing walls, this is a really good example of rotation. So let's move this barrel up here, and I can see that I'm on the green line through the barrel, so I know I'm still on the ground. Let's say we want to put the wall on an angle between these two barrels, or better yet, let's say we want to start on a 45-degree angle. So if I spacebar and left click to select the wall, if I hover over top of the wall, which is still a surface, and press the M key to move, if we hover over the wall on this face, we're going to get a green protractor, which means we're rotating on the y-axis. If I hover over top of the wall, which is a small surface, but it's still a surface, we're going to get a blue protractor, which is showing up in the middle of the wall here. Let's move this over. So if I hover over top of the wall, if I left click once, I can free rotate this wall, but if I want to rotate this on a 90-degree angle, for instance, I can move my cursor inside of the protractor and it snaps to each one of these points, and left click again, and now I have a wall that's exactly at a 90-degree angle. if we wanted to get an exact angle at something other than a snapped angle, if you look down in the bottom right hand corner here, it tells us what our angle is. So I'm just going to hit escape so I don't know what our start angle was. Our start angle is minus 90. So if I move this counterclockwise, I'm going to get 0 degrees. If I move it over here, I'm going to get positive 90. Now notice that I'm over top of this white backdrop and it's trying to snap to that as well. So that's why we're getting a little bit of twitchy movement up in this direction. If I get off of that, it rotates perfectly fine. So if I wanted to move this to, say, like a 138 degree angle, while I have this selected, I can just type minus 138 and hit enter. Now I hit minus because from our protractor that happened to be a negative angle, so we just had to press the minus to stay in that angle. And then we just typed in the angle that we wanted and hit enter, and now this wall is at 138 degrees. So to summarize, spacebar is our selection tool, M is our move tool, Q is our rotate tool, and while an object is selected, if we press the M key and we hold down or press the control key, we will get a duplicate of that object. And within the move tool, we also have the quick rotation tool. Outside of the protractor is free rotation. Inside the protractor is our snap to angle rotation. So right now, I would suggest that you take some time and move some barrels around, move some walls around, grab some of these other objects, and try moving them onto different ranges. And that will help you get familiar and comfortable with the camera movement, as well as the move and rotate commands.